that makes a lot of sense. Now, as for
so how did it happen?
So how did it happen? I'd want to say I think you can put the two together. Probably the data are underdetermined, as in that is I can't. There would be multiple scenarios that would fit those.
Give me one.
Let's say someone hangs and then the rope snaps, and you know after they're dead and their entrails burst out. I'm not a medic on that, but you know.
Yes. Okay. So let me ask this: if somebody's hanging and the rope snaps, that's happened before. How do they fall?
Down.
Do they fall head first? If you've got stories that have differences that cannot be reconciled with one says one thing, one says the other, not whether there's two women or one woman. If two women go to the tomb in one story and then one woman goes to a tomb in another, you just say, well, okay, this person's mentioning the one, but there were two. You know, so there are ways to reconcile.
Sure.
There are other things that simply can't be reconciled.
Okay, give us a couple of examples and we'll see what Peter.
What I would suggest that people listening to this do is not take my word for it or Peter's word for it, because what people are going to do is people on my side are going to agree with me, people on Peter's side are going to agree with him, and so I suggest just don't do that.
Okay.
Just do it for yourself. Get two stories in the Gospels and go through them word for word, line for line, write down everything that happens and compare your lists. And it doesn't matter, do it with the birth stories, do it with the crucifixion stories, do it with the resurrection, just do it yourself and find out, are there differences here or not? I mean, just one example. It involves Luke. The death of Judas Iskariot. So Judas in Mark, Luke, and John, Judas, nothing happens to him after, he just disappears. In Matthew's gospel, Judas hangs himself. And what happens is he goes, he feels remorse about what he's done. He's betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. He tries to return the 30 pieces. The high priest won't take it, so he throws them down in the temple and goes off and hangs himself. And the priests then say, oh, we've got these 30 pieces of silver. We can't put them back in the treasury because it's blood money. It's used to betray blood. And so they go off and they buy a field, and it's called the Field of Blood because it's purchased with blood money after Judas has hanged himself. Luke also wrote the book of Acts, as we were saying. And in chapter 1, there's a second account of Judas' death. In this account, what happens is there's nothing about Judas hanging himself, nothing about the priest buying the field. In this account, Judas goes and buys the field before he dies, and he doesn't hang himself. He somehow falls head first, and his intestines break open and bleed all over the ground. And so the people in Jerusalem start calling this the Field of Blood because Judas bled all over it.
So
those two accounts cannot be reconciled.
Okay. So before we hear Peter's response to that, is the issue then that, you know, we don't know what happened to Judas at all because these accounts, as far as you can see?
I think we can know some things.
Okay.
I think there really was a Judas. I think that he really did betray Jesus to the authorities, and I think he probably came to some kind of untimely death that was somehow connected with the field in Jerusalem.
But as to reconciling these two stories, they're just different.
But if you want to read Matthew and say, yes, that's what really happened, or if you want to read Acts, that's what really happened.
It's helpful to drill down on a specific example sometimes. So how do you read these two accounts of Judas's death?
I'd like to come to that first, but I hope also to come back on the whole question of oral tradition.
Okay, we will, yes.
So I think it's really interesting that we got these two accounts, and Bart mentioned two things as he went through the account in Acts. One is he used the word somehow, that Judas somehow, and the phrase is, became headlong. Well, that to me is just crying out for some more details. We need to explain. We need some sort of like vertical elevation. Oh, Matthew has vertical elevation because he has to hang himself. So I'd want to say that the account in Acts is crying out for a bit more. And the other issue we got is his intestines. How on earth do his intestines start bursting forth? I mean, like, that wouldn't normally happen if you just
simply fell over.
So in other words, I'd want to say, you know, that makes a lot of sense. Now, as for
so how did it happen?
So how did it happen? I'd want to say, I think you can put put the two together, probably the data are underdetermined, as in that is, I can't, there would be multiple scenarios that would fit those.
Give me one.
Let's say someone hangs, and then the rope snaps, and after they're dead, and their entrails burst out.
Okay.
I'm not a medic on that, but
Yes. Okay. So let me ask this: if somebody's hanging and the rope snaps, that's happened before. How do they fall?
Down.
Do they fall head first?
Well, it depends what their feet
Does it
hit.
depend?
Yes, it does. It depends what they're hanging over.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, if you're hanging over something and there's a rock forward and you're going to trip on it and you go head forward, I mean, like, these things can happen. I don't know.
It sounds like we're doing CSI here, crime scene investigation.
I just think the data's underdetermined.
Let me just say this. Yeah, it's underdetermined. So, to reconcile it, you have to come up with a completely implausible scenario to reconcile it. You can reconcile anything. Let me give you an example how you can reconcile anything. Right now in America, they're celebrating the moon landing. 1 out of 6 Americans don't think there was a moon landing. So you have people say there was not a moon landing, and people say there was a moon landing. And so, well, how do you, those two, and most human beings would say, well, it either is this or it's not that. If you really want to, you could say, oh, no, you can reconcile that, because actually they first didn't get there, and so they didn't land, but then they circled around the Earth again and went back, and they landed the second time. So there wasn't, and there was. Now, you could do that, but, is it really the best explanation?
But I mean, firstly, I'd want to ask, how important is it that we know the exact way in which Judas met his fate? And secondly, are you essentially trying to come up with some theory that matches two impossible
I'm not
stories?
Trying to say we know exactly how things happened. I think there are multiple ways. I'm trying to use charity. And the same charity I'd want to use on Bart. You see, Bart, a few minutes ago, said that some things cannot be reconciled. Then, a few minutes later, said, you can reconcile anything. And I'd want to say, I have the charity to say that there's a coherence behind Bart's thinking. He'd want to qualify one in the light of the other, and that the way we should deal with these things is we should do the same with ancient sources as I would do.
So it's fairly easy to reconcile what I said. I would like to know a single case in history where somebody was hanged and he died by going head first and his guts opened up.
I don't have one.
You don't, of course you don't. Nobody does. So is that so? Either they are irreconcilable or they're not.
I mean, you obviously feel that there's. You say it's underdetermined. So we've got two accounts, both in which involve a field, both of which involve Judas killing himself. Because he feels. But essentially, I suppose a lot of people might sort of sit back and say, "Well, look, guys. We know he died. We know that he betrayed Jesus. Does it matter exactly?
I'm not arguing that the Gospels are completely unreliable. I'm not saying that. The Gospels have historical information in them. Can you trust that what they say about what happened in the life of Jesus actually happened or not? I'm saying in many cases, no, you cannot trust that. If Peter wants to say that in every case they're trustworthy, that would be worth talking about. Do you think that there are any mistakes?
I don't. But
you don't think? Can you explain how your view would be different from a fundamentalist view?
Well, I think that's not a very helpful analytical term.
No, I just want to know where you stand. I mean, do you think it's completely inerrant?
I think that the traditional Christian view is that all Scripture is true. That does not mean that the copy that someone has in front of them, I'm not talking about copies. Is necessarily, valid. But do I follow the belief that when God speaks words of Scripture, they bear his own character of truthfulness? Yes.
So you think everything in the Bible is true? There are no mistakes of any kind?
The word Bible has multiple values, a physical value, and if I prefer the word Scripture, do I believe all Scripture is true? Yes.
With no mistakes of any kind anywhere?
I believe that God didn't make any mistakes of any kind.
I don't think God makes mistakes either, but I'm not talking about God.